Hello, good evening. Namaste to all the lovely viewers, and a very, very happy Valentine's Day to all the beautiful people who are listening to us. I welcome you all on behalf of JK Paper and the Times of India to yet another amazing book reading session. After a very successful first edition, which saw more than 800 entries across six categories where 30 eminent personalities took part, we are up here with the second edition of the Author Awards. Yes, it's all about her. We are celebrating her, and we are celebrating the contribution given to women authors in Indian literature. And in this celebration today, we have someone very special. We have Devapriya Roy with us. I welcome you, ma'am, on behalf of JK Paper and the Times of India. Thank you so much for taking out your time and coming for this book reading session.
I'm
Ma'am is
delighted to
best
be
known
here.
for Ma'am is best known for her books, Friends from College, Indra, and the Heat and Dust project, which is co-authored by her husband, Mr. Saurav Shah. Ma'am, so today is Valentine's Day, and I can see that you're wearing red. So I'm sure today we're going to talk on love also. Is it there in your book? Little bit about love?
Yes, yes. I'm a great champion of love, right? And in fact, I teach 18-year-olds, and they're all very post-love, it seems to me. And I keep urging them that ultimately love is what we have, especially given how hard this year has been. It continues to be hard for so many people. I think it is love which has saved us, right?
Love is what love is something which keeps us moving in every situation. So, ma'am, today you are going to read some excerpts from both of the books, Friends from
Yes,
College and the Heat and Dust Project. So,
yes,
to
yes.
begin with the first book, I would like to talk that this book, The Friend from College, is the book in any way about yourself or someone you know.
Yes, actually. So, Friends from College, the college of the title is Presidency College, where I studied, where I met the man who I later married and who I live with now, who I have shared my writing journey, my writing life with, because he's also a writer. And I wanted to sort of write this book because I was missing Calcutta, and I think I was also missing youth, you know. And Friends from College, of course, is about people who are slightly older than myself. So it's about, I say, people who, to me, are the true children of liberalization, right? Basically, people who grew up in socialist India, but came of age around the early 90s when India was going through a lot of changes. And in many ways, the fact that they are children of liberalization, they inherited a different world, but they grew up with certain values that makes them a very interesting generation for me. So these are the people. It's their love stories that I write about. And yes, indeed, there are some real life inspirations that I will tell you later who they are. Yes, Veronica, tell me when you
So,
want me to
before
read.
we move any further, sure. So we have a couple of questions for you, then we can
Sure.
read the book. Yes. So since it's Valentine's Day today, I would like to know from you that since you've written a book which is on love, how do you define love? What is your definition of love?
Oh my
That's a tricky
God,
one.
that's a really difficult question. Um, well, I I don't know. I think poets have written about love and define love better than novelists. Novelists do that over hundreds of pages. Um, but what I want to say is that, you know, uh, I think we've become a little bit impatient with love now. We think that it stands in the way of life. It it gives us it takes away as much as it gives. It fills us with suffering sometimes. It's hard. And I always feel, the romantic in me always feels, that what is difficult about love is precisely what is best about it, right? It is through that pain that we feel while in love that we also grow, that we push the boundaries of life, and sort of, come out of it stronger. Um, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, though. I think I sidestepped it.
No, no, you kind of did justice with the answer. Uh, so, ma'am, when you were writing the book, how much time you actually took to write this book, and how you
Hmm.
formed your characters? That this is going to be my
Hmm.
protagonist for the book. So, how
Hmm.
you channelized all that?
So this was a very interesting book for me to write, Friends from College, because it was serialized. It was actually published in the Telegraph for over 42 weeks. Each chapter published on a Sunday, right? And there is, for me, a very deep personal connect about the idea of serialized fiction. I've been a student of literature myself, and some of the greatest novels in the world were all serialized. Um, Bengal, where I grew up in Calcutta, the novel is also set in Calcutta. Bengal has a great tradition of serialized fiction, right? So a story that I never tire of sharing is about my grandmother, who was a great reader, and her favorite magazine, was this literary magazine called Desh. Desh used to be published every fortnight, and there was always a novel which was serialized in Desh. So what my grandmother would do is she would stack the novels by she would stack the magazines by novel, because, and sometimes these novels would go on for 2 years, 3 years. So if she wanted, she would go back, pull out an old edition. If she wanted to remind herself, wait, who's this character? Go back, check. And that, seeing that, that gave me such a tactile kind of you know uh, pleasure, that the old pages of the magazine, the novel, that went on, and only later it would be published as a book. And I always wondered how writers actually did it, because to stay to write and set it out into the world at the same time, that's very difficult, because usually what I've done with all my other books is that there have been multiple drafts. I've edited them. I've had editors, who are my first readers, giving me feedback, incorporating all of that. Here, this was all happening week by week. Of course, that was also because I'm a hopeless procrastinator, and anyone else would, I suppose, have had a bank of chapters, so that you have something to fall back on. I, of course, wrote every chapter actually on a weekly basis, right? So every week I would find out what was going to happen to the characters. You wanted to know, Veronica, how I came up with the characters. Well, I came up with the central character, and I knew that she was called Charulata Ghosh, and she had dropped the Charu in her time in England, and she now went with Lata Ghosh. In a way, Lata is also, the choice of name Lata is also a little bit of a tribute for me. For me, Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy has been sort of the novel that I return to all the time, and a great, great inspiration. So Lata Ghosh is in some ways a tribute to Lata Mehra. And of course, uh, Charulata Ghosh is about to turn 40, right? Whereas Lata Mehra was very much younger. But there is that element of college and falling in love in college over there, and nothing coming of it. So I started with the central character, Charulata Ghosh, and while writing, you see, I found out who all the other characters were. So it's a novel that basically took shape over the 42 weeks during which it was written.
So, since like most of it you mentioned, but is there any specific process which you follow while you're writing and while developing characters and about their lives? So, is there any specific follow, or you just let yourself, go free?
Um, so I think the fact that this was my third novel and my fifth book, that gave me a little bit, I suppose, a little bit of little more confidence. I'm not going to say much, because I'm in general a very deeply underconfident person, and I'm always at sea. When I'm in a book, when I'm writing a book, I'm absolutely at sea, and take the book gradually takes shape sentence by sentence. So my process is a little bit like that too. That I only find out what's going to happen when I actually write it. So it's only in the writing that I know, and I know that some writers would find this quite mystifying and confounding, because they plan the novel out in great detail even before they start writing. And I have great respect for these writers. It's just that this is how I work. So even when this Veronica, when this novel was being serialized, and my editor at the Telegraph, he would ask me, can you give me like a tentative timeline? Do you know how many more weeks you'll write? And I kept saying, I don't know. Because I really didn't know. I didn't know where it would end, and I didn't know when it would end. And of course, I didn't know what the ending would be, whether it would be a happy ending or a not so happy ending. I found out myself as I wrote. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a
But
very good thing. I mean, yes, yes, absolutely does. Like, to be free and to just follow your heart. So whatever you are writing is more following your heart than, following a set pattern, which is like really nice, I feel.
yeah, so what I
Okay,
feel that
Devapriya,
I,
let's.
yeah, no, Veronica, just to sort of add to that, what I feel is it's more the characters who are directing me. That I just listen closely to what they are saying, and I'm kind of eavesdropping uh, on their world. So when I'm in the middle of a novel, that world is very much alive, and it's happening. It's like unfolding in a parallel universe. I just listen closely and try and
Mhm.
intuit when I write. You know.
Yeah. So let's see that in your writing. Let's go to the book, and can you please read us something from the book, Friends from the College?
Yes, yes, I will. And because today is Valentine's Day, I'm reading a particularly intriguing bit where old lovers have met after a long time, right? Um, so
Wow.
so so in the book, just to give you a background, because it's chapter 18. So just to bring you up to speed with what has happened till now, Lata Ghosh has returned to Calcutta, and she has found out that her college sweetheart Ronnie Banerjee is now a famous filmmaker, right? So Ronnie has made some award winning films, and he is shooting his magnum opus right now. Okay, so Ronnie doesn't know that Lata is back in Calcutta. Lata is back for her young cousin's wedding, and Lata lives in this old house in old Calcutta, in North Calcutta, and it's a part of the city that is very haunting and redolent with atmosphere, and sort of eccentric. So there we are. This chapter is called "I Shall Spout Joy Goswami Night and Day." Now, Joy Goswami is a great Bengali poet, and you will understand why we talk about Joy Goswami at all once we've proceeded in the chapter. In dating circles, there's always been a theory that every romantic relationship has a reacher and a settler. Like all self respecting theories, it has naturally been debunked, yet it persists. Whether because of some ingrained truth contained in its folds, or simply because it sounds clever and cynical, we will never know for certain, but it persists, it does. If the autumn of 1997 was one long, hot, memorable Calcutta day, then in the brief, dramatic dusk of said day, the sky streaked rashly with pink and orange. Had someone sat Ronnie Banerjee down, say by the quadrangle or the lovers' lane in Presidency College, and outlined to him the school of thought, Ronnie would have been the first to admit that as far as Charulata Ghosh was concerned, he was the undisputed reacher. However, he would quickly go on to clarify what he and Charulata Ghosh had could not be called a romantic relationship, not by a long shot. It can't even be called a friendship. Adhuri Bagchi, the most likely candidate to have sat him down and sold him this theory, she kept up with global dating trends, even though she had sworn off prem altogether, would have said, "What Lutz and I have is friendship. What you have for Lutz, it's Batha. Nothing more, nothing less." Now, Adhuri Bagchi is Lata's best friend, college best friend. Batha. As ubiquitous as prem in the vocabulary of Bengal, but far subtler in implication. Prem was robust, a cat with 9 lives. You might fall into it just as you fell into any conversation about Goda or Derrida, Preme Pora. But you could also, with varying degrees of agency or casualness, do Prem Kora. Batha was a different continent. It hearkened to the sort of languid longing that Hindustani poets celebrated in Urdu poetry, that first prick of intense, if sweet suffering, often unrequited, signaling the commencement of something equally momentous. Batha was where our story really began. And to quote Adhuri Bagchi, it was 200 or more years ago. Meanwhile, now we come to the present, right? So it's nearly 20 years since Lata and Ronnie were in college. Now they've met today, right? 2018, when the novel is set. Meanwhile, in the tea room, in that quiet South Calcutta neighborhood, with its fine china and famous cinnamon buns, the lost lens was not found. So Lata and Ronnie, in the previous chapter, Lata and Ronnie have accidentally run into each other. And it's quite dramatic because at that time, Lata's lens is, you know how sometimes something gets in your eye and your eyes are watering and it's all quite dramatic. It harkens back to the first time Ronnie and Lata had met. For that, of course, you have to read the book. After her eyes had stopped watering and Ronnie's handkerchief had been put to good use mopping up her face, Lata reached 2 fingers into her other eye. Ronnie winced perceptibly and matter-of-factly extracted the other lens. "So much for my vanity," she said, and shoved the lone lens into a little white lens case that had emerged from her bag. "And now I'll be squinting until I get home. I should have stuck to glasses instead of trying to get those lenses for the wedding." "Whose wedding?" Ronnie asked casually, carefully concealing the sudden irrational panic that gripped him, a feeling that was so far out there and so very ridiculous that he was embarrassed even in the act of concealing it. "Oh, I thought you knew," Lata replied, her eyes finally focused on his face. They were no longer watering. Even so, they seemed different somehow, Ronnie thought. "Molly, my cousin, do you remember her?" It was as though a weight had lifted. "Of course I remember Molly. She was my carom partner for years. In fact, I ran into her once or twice when she was studying at JU. I used to take a few classes for the film studies department in those days." "Ah," said Lata. "Am I talking too much?" Ronnie asked himself. "So, our Molly is marrying your Bobby's cousin AJ. Bobby is so Ronnie is this famous filmmaker, remember? Bobby is his manager. A manager come, boss. She's kind of bossy. "Oh," Ronnie said, "I have in fact been invited to this wedding. Posh one. Taj?" "Oberoi," Lata corrected him. "And Bobby and I have been designated liaison officers." Ronnie looked appropriately perplexed. Lata smiled. Somewhere, a violin concerto started up and the hearts of stone gods melted again. That's the sort of effect Lata Ghosh has on everyone. Ronnie sat up straighter, like that, Lata tucked her hair behind an ear as she explained. You know the Ghoshas and their propensity to wreck stuff. Ghosh is basically her family. My job is to ensure that nothing unseemly happens and the wedding doesn't get ruined in any way whatsoever by the esteemed elders of our extended clan. Boro Jethu. It was now Ronnie's turn to smile. Lata remembered in that instant her 20th birthday party when Ronnie and Aduri and the rest of the gang had been invited by Manjulika for lunch, and when, outside the formal dining room downstairs, Boro Jethu had announced loudly to Jeti, well within everyone's earshot, "That's the boy. Saw him. Comes and goes all the time, the one with the hangdog expression. Can't expect Manjulika to run a tight ship. I presume all this photography, filmmaking nonsense will pass, and he'll take the WBCS exam like his father. But good she's found someone. I was always afraid she would fall into the Oti Boro Shundari trap." That day, Lata now remembered, she had worn a pair of ripped jeans. It was the global rage that season, and she had saved up for months for it, even though Manjulika kept telling her it would be cheaper to buy a regular pair and rip it herself. She remembered the hot flush that had passed through her as Boro Jethu's booming voice entered the room, bouncing off its dusty corridors. Manjulika and Nimki were in the kitchen. They were all Bengalis there that afternoon, and everyone knew the proverb, the greatest beauty doesn't find a husband, the finest homemaker never gets her house. And even though they were all radicals, believing neither in the institution of marriage nor in the art of homemaking, Boro Jethu's stone had lodged somewhere, reopening a wound she had forgotten. But before her eyes could fill with tears, Aduri had linked her arm with Ronnie and hummed their new favorite Chandrabindu song. Jodi bolo hai, BCS e boshe jabo ami. If you say yes, I'll take the BCS exams right away. So the BCS exams are basically like the UPSC for Bengal, right? So a good job for a good Bengali boy. Ronnie joined her immediately, adding the gentle baritone of his beautiful singing voice to Aduri's. The two of them swayed their way to Lata. Jodi bolo na, aurabo Joy Goswami. So if you say no, I'll spout Joy Goswami every day, night and day. And somehow, the afternoon was salvaged, redirected towards its original agenda. Food, long, pointless, never-ending conversations that provided such energy and joy. Music. Ronnie forced them to see his documentary on a middle-class travel group's journey to Sikkim. It had been rather funny. They'd listened to the mixtape Aduri had made for Lata. They'd argued about college politics. Lata could see them now, curled up on her four-poster bed, 20-year-olds all, limbs tangled, flyaway hair, fashionable clothes. At 20, they'd been sure they would live forever. They'd climb the highest mountains and dive into the deepest oceans, maybe simultaneously, and save lives and make art and find love and be happy. Oh, future happiness. They'd never questioned its reliable presence. It was right ahead, waiting, like a well-known monument on a traveler's path. Boro Jethu, by the way, is now the custodian of liberal values, Lata said, ever since Guppy came out. Guppy is her cousin, Boro Jethu's son. Guppy wasn't a half-bad guitarist, Ronnie reminisced, even though his choice of music was a tad derivative. And then Bobby appeared. She had taken charge of ordering tea after she'd introduced herself at the unwitting reunion party, and while in the queue, she'd added up the details she knew about Lata and Ronnie individually, working out how it all sat with their body language. And now she arrived at their table with a very large tray, pot of milk, tea, sugar on the side, a tidy three-tier stand with little cakes and sandwiches. Both Ronnie and Lata stood up to help, but it was unnecessary. With single-minded efficiency, Bobby apportioned the tea into the dainty porcelain cups on the table, asking Lata how much milk, how much sugar, one sandwich, a piece of cake, leaving them nothing to do to stave off the awkwardness. For all his spying on the comings and goings of that boy, Borojetu had never actually guessed that Ronnie and Lata weren't a couple. Not exactly, not until the night of her 20th birthday. Ronnie greatly preferred email to phone. For one, Lata and Manjulika did not have an extension up in their quarters, so he had to depend on the largest of the eccentric Ghoshas to even get her to the phone. For another, his poetic soul soared with the written word, typing out long quotations and chatty missives almost daily. Every evening, Lata would go over to Kakimoni's, where Kaku had a desktop with VSNL dial up internet, and check her inbox. The night of her 20th birthday party, his email was brief. Should I spout Joy Goswami night and day? Hers was even briefer. Not just yet.
Wow. I mean, I loved it. I mean, I can actually picturize myself there standing and looking at, what is happening in front of me. What an incredible read, I must say.
Thank you,
And
Veronica.
it made me so
What?
curious, to know more about the book, like, oh, how this must be happening and what is going to happen after it. So yeah, I'm surely
Yes.
gonna read it after.
Yeah, let me tell you that Ronnie now has a much younger girlfriend, and she is the daughter of the most famous actress that Bengal has had. All right.
Wow.
So, yes, and she's also going to debut in his big film. So there are some obstacles in the way of true love, or is it true love? We'll find out.
Wow. So then it's like leaving it on the suspense. Now go and read the book.
Yes.
All right, Devra, moving to the other book which you've written, and we are talking about the other book also, The Heat and the Dust Project. So it's more of a travel diary. It's about your and your husband's travel. So he co-authored the book also with you. So how you decided to, write something so insightful about your travel and about how your relationship evolved through travel. So tell us more about it.
So I think now I can say something about you. You asked me for a definition for love, Veronica, which I couldn't give you, but I can give you a test. Okay, a test for whether it is love or not, and for that you can travel with the person, whoever that is, on a very, very, very tight budget. And if you don't kill each other on that journey, if you survive, then it probably is love. Then you'll probably survive the vagaries of relationships and of life. Right? So that brings me to the basic premise of this book. So the Heat and Dust Project here, and there's a little picture of us also at the back. This was a sort of a, you can decide whether it was a bad idea or a very bad idea. But what we did is Saurav and I, we were both quite young and impulsive at the time. We're still impulsive, not young anymore. We quit our jobs. We had embarked tentatively on the path of being writers. I had just finished writing my first novel. He had just finished writing his first book of nonfiction. And we quit our jobs. We gave up the frail fences of domesticity that we had erected around us at the time. And we decided that we are going to travel around the country on a very, very tight budget, 500 rupees a day for bed and board. All right. And we'd write a book about it. Now, one of the things is, you can decide that you're going to do something and write a book about it. But let me tell you, it's a little bit stressful because you don't know if there really is a book at the end of it, like the proverbial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But apparently there was a book. And while we traveled we truly found out a lot more about each other. So, in a sense, it was also a journey about discovering ourselves. That is what we said we would. But it was also about discovering the other and what it meant to be together. Because when you have a lot of money and you go on a fancy holiday, as a lot of honeymoons are, uh, it's easy to be happy. It's easy to be happy and in love on 300 thread count sheets and the sea outside and champagne by the bed. It's harder to be happy when you're in a tiny little room. You know the kind of rooms we lived in. These were, if you're familiar with Jab We Met, these were the ghante ke hisab se rooms, okay? They were kind of shady. And, the moment we would enter in, they would give us a look and say, "Aap kya ho? Aap friends ho?" And they would be wondering, have these people eloped? Are we going to get into trouble? So all of that, it's much harder. So you actually find out what it is about the other that you want to live with for the rest of your life. Do you want me to do a little reading, Veronica?
Just before you start, I want to ask that you just mentioned that so every day your budget used to be 500 rupees. Like how you manage in such shoelace budget? I mean, and you've been
Yeah.
traveling for quite some time, and how you manage that thing?
Yeah. So one thing, of course, this was a few years ago, right? So if we had done the journey today, I think our updated budget might be something like 800 rupees a day. Okay, maybe, but it was still very hard, or maybe even less. I mean, you can still do, I suppose. So of the 500 rupees a day, the room was mostly what ate up most of the budget. So very little was left for food. And so for food, we usually ate in the roadside places where working people eat. So it used to be chapatis and one sabji, and we would share that. And if there was money, then I would have butter chapatis, while Saurav would have regular chapatis. And butter chapatis were a great, extravagance. And yeah, it was hard, but it was also brilliant. We walked a lot wherever we went. We we did a bit of we did quite a bit of going to forts and museums, and uh, we talked to people on the buses. We cadged free meals. So wherever someone offered us a free meal, we would take it with great joy. And you know what that meant? So if you saved 200 rupees one day, then it would get added on the next day. So then the next day I could maybe get a piece of cake. I was addicted to cake at the time. I mean, I still am. And we had a running battle about cake throughout the journey.
I can absolutely relate to whatever you are saying. I mean, I've been a shoelace budget traveler, and I can, that fun, that love you get. You save 200 rupees, and tomorrow you're gonna invest that in something you really like to do. I know it's an amazing feeling, but how much you get to explore each other during such travels, and with this, I can make out you both of you are truly and madly and deeply in love with each other. That's how you've written a book about it, right?
No, we didn't. So we didn't kill each other during the journey, and then we didn't kill each other during writing the book. By the way, writing a book with your partner is the worst idea ever. I mean, try not to do it. Okay, we were committed. We are still committed. There are other sort of sequels planned, but yeah, it's a really bad idea. uh, the other thing was, of course, it was about India, right? We are very different people. uh, he is an economist, and he lives, he's filled with the idealism of doing something, of feeling deeply about what's going on around us all the time. So every little thing, so he would talk to people. One of the things we did is, wherever we went, we would also go to the sabji mandi and find out the price of potatoes, the price of onions that day. And we recorded that also in our notebook. We can see today there's a lot of upheaval that's going on around us. and we spoke to a lot of people in that time, to farmers, to small traders. We we they were very generous with their stories, with their time, with meals. So it was also in many ways a transformational journey. The two people who set out on the journey, two city slickers who had grown up in big cities, the two people who went on that journey and the two people who came back were no longer the same, right? So in that sense, this the Heat and Dust Project journey was very much what shaped both of us as people, as the people we turned out to be.
All right. This sounds very interesting. Let's now go to, can you please read us some of the excerpts from the book, The Heat and the Dust Project?
I'll do little short excerpts, right?
Sure.
Rather than a long one like I did, right? What I'll do is, Veronica, if you don't mind, I'll read a little bit from the beginning, okay?
Sure. 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 Sure.
It's funny, right? And it's called Chapter 1: How Not to Grow Roots in 3 days. Okay, so the rule was, while we traveled, this rule was definitely Saurav's. His rule was that we wouldn't stay in the same place for more than 3 nights in a row. And the reason for that is that Buddhist monks used to be cautioned against sleeping under the same tree for more than 3 nights in a row. Why? Because such is the human mind that in 3 nights we become attached to a place. So even a tree then becomes my tree. I'm sleeping under this tree. This is my tree. You go and you put your little kamandalu under some other tree. So that's the thing. Now, I used to get attached to a place. It doesn't need me 3 nights. Okay, the very first night I would say, I love this place. Can we please stay on here? Right. So that was the test. How not to grow roots in 3 days. The epigraph to this chapter is, "Dear God, this parachute is a knapsack." Chandler Bing, Friends. January 2010. It is a foggy winter day in Delhi when it begins. Dilliwalas will, of course, say that all winter days in Delhi are foggy, but on some days, like this one, the fog that is barely endured in the morning stretches well into afternoon, making the city irritable and chilly, edgy with remorse. Buses for Jaipur leave at regular intervals from Bikaner House. It is about 1:30 now, midday, and we find ourselves rushing that way in an auto, unaccountably though, as there is no reason to rush, not anymore. We are, or so we would like to believe, free individuals. We have no bosses to report to, no landlords to be paid at the end of the month, not even a sad little plant gathering dust at the office desk to chide us. We can, if fancy strikes, take a detour to Himachal Bhavan, which is close by, take one of their buses and dash off to, say, Simla. I smile as I think this aloud, stretching my arms in an arch of delicious freedom. We can't, S says shortly. We have to stick to the plan. As it is, we are behind schedule. It takes a minimum of 4.5 hours to get to Jaipur, by when it'll be evening, and then we will have to scout for a really cheap hotel. Don't imagine for a second that that's going to be easy. It's winter, high season in Rajasthan. Plus, he adds, as if this were a clincher, we don't have enough warm clothes for Simla. It's not that I don't have appropriate answers to each of the above claims, because I do, I always do. But for now, I let it go. I busy myself checking if we've stashed our luggage in all right. In addition to my cavernous canvas handbag, there are 2 backpacks, one red, one black, which we bought in Calcutta last month for about 700 rupees a piece from a luggage store in Newmarket. There had, naturally, been other fancier brands in the shop. A remarkable rust-colored Samsonite, for instance, with 1,000 loops and dinky zips and discreet pockets. It was for 5,000 rupees. Hung in a special alcove in the shop, a thing of beauty. S didn't even let me go within sniffing distance of that fancy backpack, spending 1/10 of the entire proposed budget on gear, not on his watch apparently. While we are on the subject, you might as well know that there was a mighty row last night on the subject of said backpacks. To be honest, this is my first backpacking trip across India, across anywhere actually, so I did not want to take any chances. Given that we were to be gone for months, I came up with a pretty exhaustive list of what was to be packed. 3 jeans. One could get wet while the other is dirty, in which case I would thank my stars that I'd packed in a third. 6 t-shirts, they're very ordinary cotton t-shirts, very, very light. A couple of salwar kurtas. We might be traveling through rather conservative places where it might be considered too firam to prance about in jeans. For field work, for people to talk to us freely, we need to fit in, right? One dressy top and one dressy salwar kameez in case something comes up. In my head, it read as dinner with a princess. We were going to Rajasthan. An iron to ensure that all of this was well tended. I mean, I've got the lightest iron in the market. A big bottle of Easy for all the laundry. Now, how are we going to save money if we don't wash our own clothes? A big box of tissues, hand sanitizer. Mind you, I was so ahead of the curve. I was packing hand sanitizer then, okay? Long before Corona. 2 tiffin boxes if we needed to carry food, biscuits, protein bars, a medicine kit, vitamins, couple of notebooks, thermals, light sandwich toaster, a pot of Nutella. I'd only got thus far and was wondering which books to take. You can't go on a transformative journey without a few soul-stirring books. S insisted on checking out my list. Not that he offered his list to me, which was in any case a scrunched up napkin with the words, lots of underwear, 1 checkbook, charger scrawled in a corner. Then he went on to throw a mighty fit. Apparently only the hand sanitizer in my entire list would be allowed. Who made you boss of the trip? I bellowed. This project is my idea. And then he told me the following. Was I aware that over preparation could have dangerous consequences? Did I know of the strange, saddening case of Solomon Andre? I gulped. S warmed up to his theme. Solomon Andre had, in 1897, dreamt of reaching the North Pole in a hydrogen balloon. Not just any old hydrogen balloon, but one equipped so exhaustively and with such imagination that it would seem they had planned for every conceivable eventuality. They had the world's first primer stove, enough cutlery for fine dining, a Hasselblad camera, an onboard darkroom, even a cooker that could be lit remotely. Except all this did not make any meaningful difference. 3 days later, the balloon sank barely 200 miles from the starting point. Their bare-chewed bodies were discovered 33 years later. It doesn't prove anything. I grumbled, sitting on the floor amid a bunch of clothes in a sunless hotel room in Paharganj, secretly mulling over the possibility of our bare-chewed bodies coming home in a gunny sack. And my mother saying, this is why I told you this was a bad idea. That's a little extract from the Heat and Dust project.
That's, I mean, so relatable again, I can say. And this is so true, I mean, I loved it. And yeah, that's how, when you're packing, you have to be so selective, but then you have so many things, you have to be choosy. Okay, this is I'm going to take, and this is, what is more important, okay, which is less important. That's how you, figure out things. Amazing, man. I'm sure this would have been an amazing journey, like for you, a transforming one for sure. Okay, there's a question which just came. An audience member says she wishes to write but just don't know how to start. What are your suggestions? Where do I take inspiration from? So this is a question which.
Okay. So, first tip is that to write, you must read, right? So make sure you're reading a lot, right? Whatever it might be. You might like reading rom-coms, you might like reading detective fiction, because sometimes what happens is that it depends on the media, right? Right now, because there's so much of OTT viewing, right? There's Netflix and there's Amazon Prime, and you watch that a lot. But if you do that rather than reading, then you'll find that it's harder to write. To write, you must read, right? So I always say this, I tell my students as well, that there is some kind of a ratio to the number of words you read and the number of words you write. So for every 10,000 words you read, which is sort of like maybe let's say 1/5 of a novel, you write 1,000 words, right? So it's always remember that that world is deeply, interconnected. The world of words. So so read a lot. That's my first tip. And the second thing you said is, where do I take inspiration from? Inspiration is life, right? So pay attention to what's happening, to what people are saying. Go on walks, right? Just go on a walk and just eavesdrop on people's conversations. You'll you'll get a little hint into their life, and then later on you'll keep thinking, so what's going on over there, right? Because there are stories behind people, behind moments. So it's all there. Inspiration is everywhere. You just have to be able to pick it up, right? And the third thing is, of course, as in the case of the Heat and Dust project, come up with a bad idea and do something ridiculous and then write about it. It's much more fun to write about getting into trouble than not, right? So bad advice, or slightly dangerous advice, but get into trouble and then write about it. You find it's really, really, it's easy. It's much more fun to write about getting into trouble. So two things, so three things, basically. Read a lot, take inspiration from life around you. And for that, set yourself little assignments, like, if you're going to a shop, right? You know how people pick things up and keep them in their baskets, see what's in somebody else's basket. And from that, try to imagine their life. Try to imagine, their story, right? Do these little things and inspiration will come. And finally, bad ideas help with good writing. Okay.
Incredible. Like one of the best answers I think I've ever got for an inspiration, where you pick your inspiration from.
Thank you, Veronica.
There's another question, ma'am. Yeah. Since you've traveled so much for the book, for the experiment that you were doing, how much of the country did you see, and which are the interesting places you would recommend to all of us?
Okay, so I'm going to say, of course, that read the book, right? It's got all the all the trails, and it's got a lot of the stories. We traveled quite a bit, right? So the second part of the book, which is going to come out, that's in fact about our journey from Delhi to Kanyakumari, all on buses through the country, right? And the first part, the Heat and Dust project, that's based on extensive travels in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, in Himachal, in Himachal, in Western UP. There's quite a bit in Delhi. So there's a lot. And of course, now the shortcut that I'll tell you is that we've got a group on Facebook called the Heat and Dust Project, right? If you go in, if you just sign up and join there, you'll see we've got lots of pictures from all the places that we traveled to. So a lot of, so there's the whole trail is over there, right? So check that out. I think it'll give you some good ideas.
Sure. I hope whomsoever asked the question got the answer. There's another question now. Was the actual purpose of the travel was to eventually write this book, or once the travel was done, you decided the experience was worth writing a book?
This is a good question. We actually did. So I'll tell you the truth, right? The truth is that we always wanted to travel the country. Like I said, we were idealistic, and we were young, and we were also very much city people, right? Both of us, we'd grown up in Calcutta, and then we lived in Delhi. We studied at JNU, and the thing about being a student is that presidency, where we studied, or JNU, where we studied, there was a lot of debate. There was a lot of talk all the time about about the human condition, about what it was like in various parts of our country. But we wanted to also see for ourselves, right? We wanted to take ourselves out from our comfort zone. And also, you must know that, we also wanted to be writers. And we had a certain responsibility that, to be, if you want to take writing seriously, then you also have to go out and you have to, I didn't want to just write about the things that I knew. I wanted to push myself out of that, that comfort zone. So we wanted, so the order in which things came is that we definitely wanted to travel around the country on a budget. We also didn't have money, having left, we knew that if we left our jobs, we would have no money. So it would have to be a budget. So we wanted to do that. Then, of course, we thought that if we wrote a book about it, that was like a good thing to tell our parents and the world around us, right? That, oh, we're doing it to write a book, because that's one of the things about grown-ups in India, right? They always want you to do something utilitarian. So if you're traveling, we were traveling to understand the country, but that seemed like a very vague answer to give. So we would say, we're traveling to write a book. So we did actually, we were commissioned. So, we actually got a very small advance to do the travels and so on. So we knew that we would be writing a book at the end of it, but that also added to the stress, to the anxiety while traveling, right? If we had just traveled without the bird, so it was almost as though the unwritten book was a third traveler with us. So it was the two of us and the ghost of the book traveling with us everywhere. So I'm glad that we were finally able to write a book.
Yeah. And I believe it turned out to be a really nice book, as the very little part of it I've read, but it's amazing. So there's another question from the audience, that are you writing on something more, and when we can expect your next book, and what will be that book about?
Well, I don't know. Well, there's a sequel planned for this, which is called Man, Woman, Road. So that is definitely the next book that in the series. I'm also writing an academic book with my colleague Aditi Sriram, my colleague and friend, and that's very, very different. That's about the art and craft of writing. I want to write literary fiction, so there is that. I'm writing a little book on Anand Bhavan. I wrote a book called Indira in the Middle, right? It's a graphic biography of Indira Gandhi, and that's when I got very deeply interested in her life. So, yeah, but where my heart lies is literary fiction next. So I want to write a novel, but I haven't made much progress. I've just begun it, but it's too soon to talk about it.
We are expecting a book soon then.
Let's hope so.
Yes. So since you've traveled a lot, is there any interesting story which you would like to share from one of your travels? Like something really exciting happens while you both were traveling?
Lots of exciting things happened. There were ghosts. There was much drama. There were many fights, some of which have been faithfully rendered in the book. There are so many things that happened on the travels that I wonder which to pick. Okay. I think one of the things that I would like to say, which is not so much a story, one of the things that I would like to say is that somehow, we have a lot of sort of, very, since the time we traveled for this book, the tenor of conversations in India have changed quite a bit. There is a great deal of polarization now. And people, I feel, are not talking as much to each other as they are amongst themselves. And so I want to say that I think it's very important that we actually travel the country and see how our people have lived together for all these years, right? We should go and listen more to people. Get out from Twitter, and social media, and the way we see news. Of course, now because of the pandemic, no one can travel. That's different. But what I'm saying is, let's go and let people talk about their lives, right? Rather than everything coming through studio discussions and conversations, right? What we are like as a people, are we syncretic? Can we live together in peace and harmony? Yes, the examples are so many, and we saw examples of that every day. It's very affirming, and more than the prejudices and the things that we believe that we've learned from various sources. I think we should just go and talk to people. Indians are very politically, savvy, and they're also they're able to articulate these things quite deeply. So I think the answers are there. We are, as a people, looking for answers too much only from, you know, uh, from one quarter. I feel, right? Sorry, that was a ramble. We have some questions to which I can give, I think, better answers. Veronica, there's a question on what I'm reading.
Yes, 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 yes.
Well,
What are you reading?
I just read a book uh, of short stories. Um, it's called "The Women Who Forgot to Invent Facebook and Other Stories," and I loved it. So I'd recommend it. I I read all the time, right? I also read non-fiction, but I prefer fiction. Uh, Today morning, I began reading this book of a sci-fi book called Analog Virtual. So I'm kind of quite excited by that too.
And there's another question which says that how you got your inspiration to become a writer? What inspired you to write?
I think I think this is true of all writers. We are essentially people who grew up reading books, and we all found solace in the world of fiction. The ability to open a book and within minutes be transported into another world. I think that uh, all of us who felt great succor, from this process of instantly rising above our own lives through art, um, become writers. So I think it's because I loved reading that that I wanted to become a writer, because I just wanted to, in a very small way, feel a part of this. Even now, I'm a reader first. I write sometimes, but I read all the time. So that's my inspiration. Uh,
I think that's what you said. To become a writer, you have to be a reader first. Yes. Was it easy to get your first book published, or you faced any challenges being a woman?
Uh, well, I'd say that it's. I was very, very fortunate that I was able to get my first book published quite easily. It was called The Vague Woman's Handbook, and I was very fortunate that it was commissioned. It was also a very wonderful time in Indian publishing, that the Indian publishers were looking for young Indian writers, and I was still quite young, so I do consider myself very fortunate. Did I face any challenge being a woman? I would say no, because I'm quite aware that even though I'm a woman, I was a very privileged woman in many ways, and my publisher was also a woman, and I think it's perhaps it's harder now, if you're writing your first book now. It's perhaps harder, to get published, to for that first break. But I would say hang in there. Hang in there and keep reading. Don't give up. Keep reading. Keep working on your writing. Keep at it. Be persistent. It will happen. Okay, rejection letters are a part of the process. Use them to sort of strengthen your resolve, right? Because what I want to tell you is that even when you've got the first book published, it feels like that's the end, that's the happily ever after, right? Oh, my books got published. But let me tell you, that's not the end of the road. For you, as a writer, it's only the beginning, in a sense. You'll be, after a few months, you got your book published, but then you move on. Then you don't stay obsessed with it, and then it's about what you're going to write next. That's the thing which keeps you going, inspires you, right? So don't worry too much about publication. Keep watering the tree of inspiration, which is keep reading, go to bookstores, um, keep writing.
Ma'am, before we conclude, last question. Any special tips for young budding female authors who want to pick up writing as their career?
I think what happens with being a young woman is that, having while growing up, many of us censor ourselves a little bit, right? There's an invisible voice somewhere which keeps censoring you, which is why uh, you might stop yourself from doing something. You think that, okay, let me take a more established route. That's where I would say that for young women writers, that don't censor yourself. Always, remind yourself that your inner life is free. Your inner life is uncensored. Take charge of it. Read other women, right? And that usually helps, because I see myself in a tradition of great women writers and readers. So I turn to them, when I'm having a very difficult time. I'll read Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own every now and then. I'll I'll go read about Ashapurna Devi, this great Bengali woman writer great Bengali writer who I've admired. So write to other women writers. I'm sure they will respond. Find yourself a community, of supportive men and women, right? Basically, always tell yourself that whatever happens around you, even if some of that is not in your control, your inner life must stay uncensored, right?
Well, that was very encouraging. Thank you so much, Devapriya. With this, we conclude. That was an incredible book reading session with you. I would like to thank
Thank
you
you.
on behalf of the
Thank
Times
you.
of India and the JK paper. It was an honor to have you here, and all the best for your future projects. And with this, we conclude this session. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you.
Have a very happy Valentine's
Thank you.
and keep smiling. Thank you.
Thank you.